I live in a neighborhood that's so quiet you can hear the rustling of leaves on the trees during a breeze. Suburbia at its finest. Manicured lawns, houses spaced just far enough apart to provide a sense of privacy, but close enough to feel like you're part of a community. Everyone knows everyone, and most people keep to themselves, maintaining the appearance of a friendly, tight knit group. That was at least until Karen moved in. Let me give you some background on Karen because her story is the reason I'm sharing mine with you today. Karen moved in just about 2 years ago, and from the moment she arrived, it was clear that she was going to be one of those people, the type who couldn't mind their own business. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm all for community engagement, but there's a difference between participating in your neighborhood and trying to run the whole thing like you're the boss. And Karen, she made sure everyone knew she was the self appointed leader of our little community. If the lawn wasn't mowed at exactly the right length, Karen would send you a passive aggressive note. If you left a trash can out too long after collection, she'd be the first to notify the HOA. But her greatest joy? Complaining about deliveries and parcels. And I'm not talking about minor things. No, Karen was obsessed with packages. My packages specifically. At first I thought it was just coincidence, or maybe she had an unhealthy obsession with keeping things in order, but I started noticing a pattern. Every time a package was delivered to my house, if I wasn't home to grab it immediately, Karen would somehow find it. I never actually saw her take one, but it was always the same deal. I'd track my package, and when I arrived home, there would be no sign of it. And when I'd check with my neighbors, there was Karen, smiling innocently and offering to help by bringing it over. It didn't take long for me to realize that my packages weren't getting lost, they were being taken. Now I know what you're thinking. Why didn't I just report her? Well, at first, I didn't want to make a big deal out of it. I'm not one to escalate things unnecessarily. But after a few instances of my packages going missing, I started getting frustrated. One particular package stands out, a limited edition gaming console that I had been waiting for months. I'd been tracking it daily, and I had to make sure I was home the minute it arrived. But of course, something came up that day, and I wasn't there when it was delivered. I checked the tracking, and it said it was dropped off at 2:15 p.m. When I arrived home at 3:30 p.m., the package was nowhere to be found. I thought maybe it was left somewhere else, but when I checked with the neighbors, the pattern was clear. Karen had it again. I wasn't about to let this go anymore. I'm a patient person, but this was beyond the point of being reasonable. So I did what any frustrated person would do. I decided to take matters into my own hands. But rather than confront her directly, I wanted to come up with something clever, something that would teach her a lesson, but also something that didn't risk escalating the situation into an all-out war. After all, I had no idea just how far Karen might go, and I wasn't about to have my life become a living hell because of a petty argument. I started thinking about pranks, harmless but effective ones that could still send the message that stealing someone's property is not okay. And then I remembered a story I had heard about a prank involving a skunk. It wasn't harmful, but it was definitely memorable. Now, I'm not a mean person by nature, but there's something about getting payback on someone who's been an absolute pain in your life that makes the wheels in your brain start turning. What if I could send Karen a package that she would never forget? But how could I make sure it wasn't too much? And how could I be sure she wouldn't report me? I did some research. Apparently, it's possible to get live animals shipped through certain services, provided that the animal is well taken care of and the necessary precautions are in place. I didn't want to harm the skunk, obviously, just a harmless prank to get Karen to understand that messing with my packages was crossing a line. After some thinking, I decided to go ahead with the idea. I found a company that specialized in sending safe, well-behaved animals for educational purposes and pranks. They had a variety of options, but the skunk seemed to be the perfect choice. Why a skunk? Because it's a little quirky, a little unexpected, and just the right amount of chaos. Plus, it would make Karen think twice before trying to take another one of my packages. I placed the order, making sure to choose the option that would allow the skunk to be transported safely. The company assured me that the animal would be fine, and I made sure the skunk had a good few hours of care and attention before the prank was carried out. It wasn't about being cruel, it was about sending a message. Once everything was arranged, I sat back and waited for the package to arrive. I could hardly contain my excitement. My plan was set, and I was ready to execute it. I even started feeling a little giddy about the idea of getting back at Karen in a way that she would never see coming. When the day finally arrived, I was on edge. I had everything ready: a box, some packing materials, and a few other items to make it look like a regular delivery. I placed the skunk carefully inside the box, making sure it was comfortable and had enough room to move around. Then I sealed it up and addressed it to Karen. I could already imagine her face when she opened that box. She'd probably think it was just a regular delivery at first, until the skunk made its presence known. The thought of it made me laugh, but I wasn't going to back down now. I wanted to make sure she understood the consequences of taking things that didn't belong to her. I delivered the package to her front door, rang the bell, and then I hid behind a tree across the street, watching with anticipation. I had never been so excited for someone else to open a package. I knew Karen would never expect this. I saw her come out of the house and bend down to pick up the box. She didn't even look at the return address. She just grabbed it and headed back inside. And then the moment of truth came. A few minutes later, I heard a scream. Not just any scream. A scream that made my spine tingle. I couldn't help it. I burst out laughing from my hiding spot. She was probably freaking out. And then I saw her, Karen, bolting out of her front door, looking like she'd just seen a ghost. The skunk had made its great escape, and it was now running around her front yard, probably a little confused but harmless nonetheless. I watched as she ran back inside, slamming the door behind her. I had no idea if she was planning on calling animal control or just hiding in her house until the skunk left, but I wasn't about to stick around to find out. The deed was done, the message was sent, and Karen, in all her self-righteousness, was finally getting a taste of her own medicine. As the days passed after the prank, I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. I knew Karen would have learned her lesson, but there was something even more satisfying about the way the entire neighborhood seemed to react. Karen, once the queen of the HOA, the self-appointed ruler of everyone's behavior, had been humbled, not in a way that would have sparked any public confrontation, but in a way that made her very aware that there were consequences to messing with the wrong person. I couldn't help but laugh a little every time I saw her peering out of her front window, too paranoid to even step outside. I'd finally gotten my revenge, and it felt good. But of course, things were never quite as simple as they seemed. Over the next couple of weeks, Karen started doing something strange. She'd act all sweet and pretend like nothing had happened, but I could see through her attempts at diplomacy. Every time I came across her in the neighborhood, she would flash me a sickly sweet smile, way too forced to be genuine. She'd ask about my day, comment on the weather, or offer some other meaningless small talk, but I wasn't fooled. Karen didn't just forget about the skunk incident. She was pretending it didn't faze her, pretending that it didn't leave a mark on her pride. What I didn't realize was that Karen wasn't done with me. In fact, she was just getting started. A few weeks later, I began noticing odd things happening around my property. It started small. An envelope would arrive, opened, or a small package would go missing, even if I was home. I initially thought it was a simple mistake. Maybe the delivery people were at fault, but things got weirder. I started finding little notices left on my door, none of them official HOA documents, but always with a threat of some kind. The first one simply read, "Next time it won't be just a skunk." It was written in block letters, which made it seem even more eerie. No signature. Nothing. I thought about ignoring it, but the more I found these cryptic notes, the more I realized Karen was trying to send a message. Maybe she was angry that I'd pranked her and that I'd gotten away with it. But this was different. It felt like an escalation, and it had the distinct feeling of being personal. I did some thinking, and I realized this was no longer a battle of wills. Karen had stepped up the game. She wasn't just trying to steal packages anymore. Now she was trying to mess with my life in a way that was downright creepy. I tried not to let it get to me, but it was hard not to feel paranoid. What if she was planning something bigger? What if I couldn't protect my property from her meddling? It wasn't long before I realized the only way to deal with Karen was to outwit her. I couldn't let her think she had the upper hand, especially not after everything that had happened. I needed a plan, another one. I began keeping a close eye on my front door, making sure that no more strange notes or opened envelopes appeared. For the next few days, I stayed vigilant. I didn't want to risk anything disappearing again. But the moment I let my guard down, something happened. I came home from work one afternoon to find that my front door was slightly ajar. My stomach twisted into a knot as I pushed the door open fully, stepping inside carefully. I immediately checked the usual spots, my desk, my living room, and my kitchen. Nothing seemed out of place, but something felt off, like I was being watched. Then I noticed it. A small, shiny object on my coffee table. At first I thought it was just a reflection from the light, but when I picked it up, I realized it was a key that wasn't mine. It took me a moment to process what I was holding, and then it hit me. It was the key to my mailbox, and I knew exactly who had done it. Karen had found a way to break into my space, crossing yet another boundary she had no right to cross. She had gone through my mail, and in doing so, confirmed she was spying on me more than ever. I felt a wave of anger flood through me, but I didn't want to react too hastily. I thought about it for a moment, weighing my options. Should I confront her again, this time about her creepy behavior? Should I go to the police? The problem was that I didn't have enough proof to make a legitimate case, at least not yet. But I wasn't about to back down either. I needed to stop Karen before things escalated further. The next few days felt like a whirlwind. I was constantly on edge, looking for any sign of Karen's intrusion. Every time I stepped outside, I was hyper-aware of her car parked nearby or her too close presence in her front yard. It felt like she was watching me more than ever. The key to my mailbox confirmed what I'd suspected. She had no boundaries, and she was willing to go to extreme lengths to get back at me for the prank. Finally, I decided to take action. I needed to regain control, and this time I wasn't going to rely on a simple prank. I was going to make sure she knew I was not someone to mess with, that there were real consequences for crossing the line. I spent the next week quietly preparing. I had my mind set on an idea that, while it didn't involve anything quite as outrageous as a skunk, it would still be a reminder of what happens when you mess with the wrong person. I began to quietly gather items that would serve as a deterrent. Tools for security, like a stronger lock for my mailbox, and a motion-sensing camera that would alert me whenever someone was on my property. I also made sure I had my home insurance up to date, just in case things got out of hand. One afternoon, after setting up the cameras, I noticed something. There was Karen, once again sneaking around my front porch. She was looking around suspiciously, clearly trying to see if anyone was home. The moment she saw the motion sensor light flick on, she froze and bolted back toward her house. I knew what I had to do now. The next morning, I went to the HOA office. I wasn't there to complain about the petty grievances like Karen had been known for. No, this time I had something serious. I presented the evidence I had been collecting, the notes she'd left, the key to my mailbox, and the numerous instances of her spying on me. I didn't just want to make her look bad. I wanted to make sure she understood that her actions had consequences. Within days, the HOA held a meeting. Karen, of course, tried to defend herself, but the evidence was overwhelming. The situation became a turning point for her. Not only did she lose her place in the HOA leadership, but her neighbors started distancing themselves from her too. The self-appointed queen of the neighborhood was now just another disgruntled resident. Karen never spoke to me again after that. It was clear she had learned her lesson, and though I wasn't necessarily seeking a dramatic resolution, I did feel a sense of satisfaction. The neighborhood returned to its quiet normalcy, and I could finally breathe again without the constant fear of my packages being stolen or my life being intruded upon. After Karen was ousted from the HOA leadership, it was as though the entire neighborhood breathed a collective sigh of relief. The air felt lighter. No more passive-aggressive letters or unsolicited visits. For once, the lawns remained as they should, trimmed and undisturbed, without Karen standing in someone's yard, clipboard in hand, ready to report any infraction. The neighborhood went back to being the quiet, pleasant place it had always been, free from the constant tension that had followed Karen's rise to power. But even though things seemed to return to normal, I wasn't naive enough to believe that Karen had given up. People like her don't take defeat lightly. I'd been through enough of her antics to know she wouldn't just let things go. Sure enough, I started hearing whispers around the neighborhood. At first it was just rumors, disjointed snippets of gossip as I walked past neighbors. Some said she was planning her next move. Others claimed she was bitter and vengeful. I didn't know which one was true, but I knew one thing: she wasn't finished. Then it happened. One morning, as I was leaving for work, I noticed something strange on my front door. It was a small, thin envelope, taped just below the doorknob. My heart skipped a beat, and I felt a familiar knot tighten in my stomach. Not again. I grabbed the envelope and carefully peeled it open. Inside there was just one sheet of paper. The note was brief, but the words were clear. You can't escape your past. The truth will always find you. The handwriting was neat, deliberate, and unmistakably Karen's. I immediately checked around the yard, scanning for any sign of her or anyone else who might have left it there. But there was no one. It felt like she was always lurking, just out of sight, like some kind of shadow hanging over me. I didn't know what this meant. Was it a warning, a threat, or just another empty attempt at getting back at me? But one thing was certain. Karen wasn't going to let me forget what had happened, no matter how many weeks had passed. I decided to reach out to a couple of neighbors who had been close enough to the situation to understand the dynamics. They were all too happy to talk, and from what they told me, it seemed like Karen was obsessed with getting her revenge on me. After losing her position in the HOA and the social standing she once had, she had started spending her days in isolation, but apparently she was still plotting something. My prank with the skunk might have been funny, but it had left a bitter taste in her mouth. I wasn't sure how serious this latest note was, but I couldn't just ignore it. I decided to take precautions. I got a new security system installed, motion sensors around the yard, new locks, cameras, the works. But what worried me more than anything was the psychological toll this whole ordeal was taking on me. I felt like I was living in a constant state of anxiety. Every time I heard a car drive by, every time I caught a glimpse of someone standing in their yard, my heart would race. The worst part was that I wasn't sure if Karen was truly out to get me or if I was just paranoid. The truth was, I didn't feel safe in my own home anymore. I started to wonder what I could do next. Could I ever feel like I truly won against someone like Karen? Or would she continue to haunt me from the sidelines, always finding new ways to make my life uncomfortable? A few more weeks passed without any major incidents. I thought maybe Karen had finally given up. Maybe she was just stirring the pot one last time with the envelope to get a rise out of me, but otherwise, she was finished. That's what I told myself anyway. But it didn't last. The tension that had been brewing beneath the surface came to a head on one fateful evening when I arrived home to find my garage door wide open. Now, I live in a pretty safe neighborhood, and I've always been careful to lock up when I leave. But this time, the door was open, as if someone had been inside. My heart dropped. I rushed inside the house, every muscle in my body tensed with fear, but there was nothing to suggest anything had been stolen. Nothing had been disturbed inside either. It was as if someone had simply been there, lingering for a while. I immediately checked the security camera footage. As I scrubbed through the footage, I saw something that sent a chill down my spine. There, on the video, was Karen, standing right in front of my garage door. She lingered for several minutes, pacing in front of the house, before walking away, never entering the garage, but still managing to make her presence known. The footage didn't show her doing anything specific, just standing there, staring at the house. But I knew that something wasn't right. She was up to something. The envelope had been her warning shot, and this was her next move. I was done being a passive observer in this situation. This time, I was going to take the initiative. I called the police to report the incident, but of course the footage alone didn't provide enough evidence for them to take any real action. They promised to keep an eye on the neighborhood, but beyond that, there wasn't much they could do. It seemed like I was on my own. The next day, I confronted a few of the neighbors who had also been affected by Karen's behavior. I knew it was time to rally the community and show Karen that her antics wouldn't be tolerated. If she thought she could scare me into submission, she was wrong. I wasn't about to let her terrorize me anymore, but what really surprised me was the response from my neighbors. I thought they would be hesitant, maybe too afraid of crossing Karen, but I was wrong. They were all ready to stand up to her. They had had enough too. That night we gathered together to come up with a plan. Some of us had cameras installed in our yards, and others had security systems that could help track suspicious activity. We decided that we were going to document every little thing Karen did from now on, no matter how small. If she thought she could get away with this, she was sorely mistaken. We started watching each other's homes in shifts. It wasn't ideal, but it felt like the only way we could be sure Karen wouldn't get away with anything else. For the next few days, we kept an eye on Karen's movements, just in case she tried anything new. It didn't take long for our surveillance to pay off. One afternoon, as the sun was setting, we caught Karen sneaking around one of the neighbors' backyards. She was crouching low, moving as stealthily as she could, almost like a predator stalking her prey. I couldn't believe my eyes. This was beyond creepy. And it wasn't just an idle threat anymore. This was calculated. We immediately called the police again, and this time we had more than just suspicion. We had hard evidence. The officers arrived within minutes, and they had Karen right where we wanted her. She tried to deny it at first, but with the video footage and the witnesses, there was no way she could talk her way out of it. Karen was charged with trespassing and harassment, and her days of tormenting the neighborhood were finally over. After that night, Karen disappeared from the neighborhood for good. We never saw her again, and it was as if a dark cloud had been lifted. Our lives slowly returned to normal, though there was a part of me that would always be on edge, waiting for the other shoe to drop. I think it's hard to ever truly forget someone like Karen, but at least I had peace of mind again.